Hello and welcome to The Woven Word. This is a series of programmes in which we consider some of Ulster's vernacular poets, in particular a group of writers known collectively as the rhyming weavers or the weaver poets, who mainly flourished in the 18th and 19th centuries. They were ordinary working class folk, and their poetry shines a light on what it was like to be an ordinary person living in Ulster at that time. We've filmed this series in 360 degrees, and what that means is you can completely interact with the scenery. If you're at home with your computer and a mouse, move it around and you can look left and right and up and down and behind you. Or for an even more immersive experience, put on a VR headset and it'll be like you're right here with me. What a beautiful place to be. The sun is shining on our back. Look behind you. You're looking out over the Irish Sea here on the eastern coast of County Antrim in Northern Ireland. Beyond that cloud bank lies Scotland. Sweep then round to your left and you'll see the beautiful glens of Antrim. Garran Point is out there. This great headland of Luragethan. The green patchwork of fields and hedgerows. It's a gorgeous landscape. Up behind me, on this hill, behind those trees, is Ossian's grave. Ossian, the son of the legendary giant Finn McCool. Also up there is a memorial to a man called John Hewitt, who actually wrote his PhD in the 1950s on the rhyming weaver poets. And nestled at the foot of the hill down there to your left is the village of Cushendall, which was home to the subject of our programme today, James Stoddard Moore, better known as Dusty Rhodes. Now, before we get to him, let's think about specifically where we're standing, because this hill, this very distinctive rounded hill, is known as Tiveragh, Tiveragh, or the locals call it the Fairy Hill, because legends abound that the good folk, the little people, live on this hill. In fact, Dusty Rhodes, James Stoddard Moore, wrote a poem called Tiveragh. Let me give you a couple of lines from that. There's a hill in the north by the side of the sea, the home of the fairies, light-footed and free. 'Tis there that you'll oft hear them fiddle and sing, while with shout and with laughter the bramble brakes ring. So you never know, you might hear some fairy laughter as we stand here today. Now, as I say, we're overlooking Cushendall, that beautiful little village, and it was there on Christmas Day, 1844, that James Stoddard Moore was born. His father was originally from Huguenot stock. They'd moved to near Edinburgh in Scotland. He was a shoemaker, but he moved across here when he married Catherine Graham, whose father was a farmer living down here in the glens of Antrim. And Dusty was born just outside the village in an old corn mill on Christmas Day. Tragically, whenever he was only 14, both of his parents died within 6 weeks of each other. They'd been key influence on him. His father in particular had homeschooled his young son. So now he was left with no parents. He went and stayed for a time briefly with an auntie, but the pull of the sea called to him. I suppose living here right on the sea, he'd always seen it, he'd always seen that view, and he set off for a life on the sea. He was a sailor for a number of years. Then he tried his hand at gold prospecting in California. He became a soldier with the Welsh Fusiliers, and he was in India, he was in Afghanistan. He sailed the Arctic Ocean and the Antarctic Ocean on whaling ships on journeys that could last up to 2 years. He was a pioneer on the African railways, and he crossed the oceans in merchant ships. He loved that life in the sea. He loved the endless horizon, looking at the stars at night, being inspired by the marvellous sights that you see out there. And he also enjoyed the camaraderie, the songs and the shanties and the ballads and the superstitions of sailors. Eventually, however, he decided to come back home to his beloved glens of Antrim. He married 3 times and was widowed 3 times, so a bit of tragedy there in his personal life. During these years he lived in Belfast, he lived in Ballycastle, eventually kind of settled in Coleraine, but he had that roaming nature. He said he could never settle in one place for more than about 10 weeks at a time, so he became a tramp. And he would tramp these hills. He would wander for 10, 12, 14 miles a day, going between Cushendall to the Greyman's Path, to Ballycastle, to Ballyvoy. And as he roamed, he composed poetry. That's why he's such a perfect exemplar for this series, because he wrote ordinary working class poetry in his own idiomatic, vernacular rich language, using Scots words, Ulster-Scots words, Irish words, English words. He was a very, very talented poet. He had a great natural ability. There was a ruggedness of expression. He was very passionate. He had a very vivid imagination and great clarity of expression. His poems covered all kinds of subjects, you know. He himself loved the poetry of Lord Byron, so some of his poems are quite grand in nature. But he wrote about love, lots of ballads to various lassies. He wrote about God. He had a great spiritual faith and he saw the hand of the Creator everywhere. He wrote about folklore, about history, about legends, about the tales of the great characters from the folklore of the glens of Antrim. He compared the great cities and towns he'd seen around the world to his own beloved Cush and Doll. His poetry began to reach a wider audience when some of his work was published in the Northern Constitution. When he was almost 80 years of age, the historian of Ballycastle, a man called Robert McCahan, wrote an article about him. Sam Henry, the great local collector of songs, he wrote an article about him as well, and people began to know Dusty Rhodes and his wonderful poetry. Eventually, a lot of his writing was gathered up in this little book, A Wreath of Song, which contains some of his best poems. He lived a good long life. He lived to the age of 95 and he's actually buried in Ballycastle, not too far from here. But he's largely been forgotten nowadays, which is why it's so important to celebrate him in a series like this. And if you love Ulster-Scots poetry, you'll love, for example, the Pibroch of Gordon or MacDougall's Christening, some wonderful poems. But I'm going to read for you one called The Causeway Fair. How local is that? We're just across the glens here from the Giant's Causeway. And this commemorates an outing to the Causeway Fair, you know, on the old tram. The old tram still runs nowadays. And all the colour and delight and the wheelings and the dealings that would go on up at the Giant's Causeway. You'll enjoy the beautiful vernacular dialect in this. You'll hear pronunciations like baith for both, owl for old. He talks about the lonans, the country lanes. He uses the word mony for many. Dannerin is kind of wandering around. Berlin is dancing. Your head is your head. You'll hear all of these words. And as I read the poem, you'll see the words displayed on the screen as well, so you can read along. If you're watching this on YouTube, what you can do is expand the description and jump forward to a different area where you're able to look at magnificent 360-degree landscapes and views shot all around this inspiring part of North Antrim and the beautiful glens. So I hope you'll enjoy now hearing this poem about the Causeway Fair, looking at beautiful sights and picking up the beautiful poems and the Ulster-Scots vocabulary of James Stoddard Moore or Dusty Rhodes. Thank you.
The Causeway Fair by James Stoddard Moore, also known as Dusty Rhodes. Says Molly to Tam, "Are you ready? The train, she is getting up steam. Tak breakfast and keep yourself steady, and we'll baith enjoy the sweet scene." Say Molly and Tam, they baith hurried, their faces unclouded with care. Awa doon the lonan they scurried on their way to the Old Causey Fair. Oh, when they arrived at the causey, sure all things were jolly and gay. There, mony a lad and fair lassie were tripping and dancing away. When they met wi' a Yankee, fair stocket, danrin by wi' his head in the air, with the pillars of fin in his pocket, on his way frae the Old Causey Fair. Oh, the organ was tootin' fu merry, with the tunes the old Boreas blew, while twa-three pickpockets frae Derry were getting themselves in a stew. The pillars were looming recht proudly, their heads sticking up in the air, while the guides were extolling fu loudly the scenes at the Old Causey Fair. The swing boats were birling roon brawly, their occupants snoring with dread, while beside them an old Dolly Molly was kicking her heels ower her head. We spent all we had at the daffin, till we hadna a copper to spare. Then homeward, roaring and laughing, the scenes o' the Old Causey Fair. The Causeway Fair by James Stoddard Moore, also known as Dusty Rhodes. Says Molly to Tam, "Are you ready? The train, she is getting up steam. Tak breakfast and keep yourself steady, and we'll baith enjoy the sweet scene. Sae Molly and Tam, they baith hurried, their faces unclouded wi' care. Awa doon the loanin they scurried on their way to the old Causeway Fair. Och, when they arrived at the Causeway, sure all things were jolly and gay. There, mony a lad and fair lassie were tripping and dancing away. When they met wi' a Yankee, fair stocket, danrin by wi' his head in the air, with the pillars of fin in his pocket, on his way frae the old Causeway Fair. Oh, the organ was tootin' fu merry, with the tunes the old Boreas blew, while twa-three pickpockets frae Derry were getting themselves in a stew. The pillars were looming recht proudly, their heads sticking up in the air, while the guides were extolling fu loudly the scenes at the old Causeway Fair. The swing boats were birling roon brawly, their occupants snoring with dread, while beside them an old Dolly Molly was kicking her heels ower her head. We spent all we had at the daffin, till we hadna a copper to spare. Then homeward, roaring and laughing, the scenes o' the old Causeway Fair.